I'm a theoretical physicist, and being a physicist, that means that I get to study nature. It's my job to find out the way the world works, and I love trying to find out the way the world works. As a theorist, it means that I do a lot of math, and so I scribble equations that I think have something to do with the way that the world should be. And then my colleagues who are experimental physicists, they have laboratories, and they run experiments to measure the way the world actually is, and then we get together with the way the world actually is and the way that theorists think the world should be, and that intersection pushes our knowledge along about how the way the world works. Everyone's had this experience where you go outside at night, on a clear night, and you see so many stars. And if you've ever maybe gone camping away from light pollution, you see even more stars, and you see this beautiful swath of the Milky Way galaxy. And there are about 100 billion stars in our galaxy. I don't know if you've tried to count them lately. And in the observable universe, we can tell that there are at least about 100 billion galaxies, each with about 100 billion stars. That's a lot of stars. It's a vast universe to study. What I work on specifically is what electrons do inside of solids. I'm a condensed matter physicist. By condensed matter, we just mean the stuff you can touch. If you can hold it in your hands, it's part of my field of physics. And I study the electronic world inside, the universe inside of those materials, if you will. Now, as a physicist, I'm also a believer, and so for me, the wonder of the universe around me also intersects with my faith in a very intricate way, in that I believe that God is the creator of all of these things. So when I look at nature and I see beauty, I also at the same time get to say, thank you, God, for creating that. That is so amazingly cool. And as a believer, I also look forward to when God is going to create a new universe. I hate to break it to you, but this one isn't going to last forever. The laws of physics that are set up right now in this universe are such that the universe cannot support life indefinitely. And so it's clear, even from a physics perspective, that God never meant for this to be our permanent home. He's always intended to move us into the next place, the next universe, if you will. And I love those descriptions in the book of Revelation at the end of the Bible that talk about what God's going to do in this new universe. First of all, there won't be any more oppression. We'll have a society that's free from evil, and yet we will have free will at the same time. But as a physicist, I get kind of distracted and excited by the descriptions of physics that are in there. It describes this huge city, large enough for every single person who's ever lived to have a large space to live in. And the city is so large that if it existed in our universe, it would collapse under its own gravitational weight. So clearly, the laws of gravity are different in the new universe. And the descriptions of how light works in this new heaven and new earth that's described at the end of the Bible also indicate there's new physics there. So as a physicist, I'm not only excited to study what God has done in this universe, but I'm really looking forward to finding out what he's doing in the new universe when he places us there. Now, millennia ago, there was a man named Abraham, and God made a promise to him. God told him, Abraham, go out and count the stars if you can. I'm going to give you that many descendants. And God spoke this to a childless old man. Now, Abraham loved God, and I have to believe that he at least made a crack at counting all of those stars. So you have to picture Abraham in the desert at night with no light pollution, looking at this swath of the Milky Way galaxy and trying to count the stars. And at some point it dawns on him, if God can do all this, of course he can give me descendants, even though I'm an old man who doesn't even have any kids yet. And the text then, which would be Genesis, goes on to record for us the gift that God gave Abraham in response. God took Abraham's faith and gave back to Abraham the greatest gift any of us can get, which is the gift of a clear conscience that comes from knowing that we are loved by God and forgiven by God. For Abraham as well, it intersected very much with this awestruck looking at the universe and looking at nature and connecting that back to the Creator. In the research part of my job, what this looks like to integrate my faith with my vocation is that every time I sit down to work, I begin with prayer. And the reason I do that is because to make progress in physics takes a lot of intense thought and effort. And what do I need to get my job done? I need wisdom, I need knowledge, I need physical intuition, I need logic, I need physical insight. All of these things come from my Creator. And so the first thing I do when I work is I sit down and I just acknowledge that I'm not the source of those things, and I need Him to provide them for me if I'm going to make progress on what I'm trying to figure out that day. Now, I do have to produce results in a timely manner, which often can mean that the culture that I'm immersed in is to work many hours every week, almost nonstop. And I have an uncle who thankfully challenged me on this a few years ago, and he said, Erica, you need to try a Sabbath. Try taking a solid break from work on the weekend. And I thought, I can't possibly do this. I have too much work to do. And he said, Erica, just try the experiment. And of course, when he said the word experiment, I was hooked because I'm a scientist. And he told me to do an experiment to find out whether that would work. So I had to try the experiment. Lo and behold, not only was it fun to take that break over the weekend, but I felt much more energized when I got back to work later that week. To God that I need your spiritual power to be in this in order for it to be effective. I'm, of course, not alone as a believing scientist. One of my heroes is James Clerk Maxwell. If you're not a physicist, that name may not ring a bell, but all the physicists just had their ears perk up and say, oh yeah, James Clerk Maxwell of Maxwell's equations. He's the one who had the incredible insight that electricity and magnetism are two sides of the same coin. But not a lot of people know that James Clerk Maxwell was a serious Christian, and he took his belief in God very seriously. Now, so like Maxwell, I dedicate my work to God and I invite Him into it because I believe that He's the source of those inspirations ultimately. And so I have spent a lot of time thinking and praying, but also discussing with other believers what it looks like to follow in Maxwell's steps in this area. What does it look like to apply Christian principles in order to pursue excellence for God in my field? And I've benefited from lots of conversations with other believers about what that looks like, and I've benefited from their accountability. Also, I believe it's important as a believing scientist to be ready to talk to my not yet believing colleagues about how these things mesh. I do read the Bible. It's my habit to read the Bible every day, and there are statements that the scriptures make that have something to do with physics. And so I think it's extremely important for us as believers to know how to discuss with our colleagues what those intersections look like. And I've benefited tremendously from reading other Christian thinkers on these issues. I've benefited tremendously, for example, by reading the works of William Lane Craig and Ravi Zacharias and Hugh Ross and others. Their works have enabled me to have such a firm foundation for my faith, especially as it regards my own discipline of physics, that I'm a very comfortable, even outspoken Christian in my own field, and I'm quite comfortable and even excited if colleagues want to discuss that with me. One of the other reasons that I'm so excited to be a theoretical physicist who's working at a major university is that at the university level, we have people from all over the world come to study. It's an incredible privilege to me to get to interact with people from so many different nations and from so many different cultures. Now, if you're a believer, you are familiar with the last command that Jesus gave us before He departed the earth. He said to us, go and make disciples of all nations. And probably one of the first things that comes to our mind is that we need to then make missionaries and send them to the other nations. But there's an incredible thing happening right now in the universities, which is right now, people from all nations are coming to us. People from all nations pass through my own university, and it's an incredible privilege to interact with them. And I can't help but think what would happen if the whole believing community caught this vision of the nations coming to us. What would it look like if every single international student were invited into a believer's home for dinner? Just that simple act of hospitality could spark conversations, transform lives, and then think about what happens when these students go back to their own nations and they become leaders because of the degrees they've gotten overseas. So I pray for my students. If you're one of my students and you're watching this, you should know that. I pray for you on many different levels. And I also pray that through the influence of believing professors at the university, that we will draw all nations into a relationship with God. So these are some of the ways that I have learned to integrate my faith with my vocation. I hope I've encouraged you to start the conversation yourself with your other believing colleagues about what it looks like in your own discipline to integrate your faith with your discipline.